Okay, welcome everybody. Tonight we're going to talk about smart contracts and how we're going to use them to break down data silos within an enterprise. Go through some slides here, and then we're going to have some demonstrations of doing that using the language Daml that we were just talking about. Remind everybody, on Thursday, January 23rd, we're going to have our next meetup, and this is we're going to do a deep dive with some practical use cases. But today we're going to talk about data silos. So silos exist in an enterprise, right? And if you've been around like I have, you often find this within the enterprise, right? So within a company, you also have this setup where you have a bunch of people, a bunch of different departments, each of them have their own databases, right? So we have these silos that go across organizations. There's multiple applications, you're aligned with your organizational hierarchy, multiple databases, passing data back and forth. You're looking for a single source of truth. Now, should we turn around and say, okay, this is bad, you shouldn't have architected your business this way? Well, you really can't. A lot of this stuff is actually done by regulatory lines. So what is actually wrong with this? You have this virtual pipeline, right? The problem is, right, that you have these operational problems because of the virtual pipeline. We aggregate and we reconcile, and this is where we're actually spending most of our efforts. The stuff that we really want to do is enrich the data and do some analysis, right? So the business can move on and they can help themselves with this. So what we're going to propose is to go ahead and virtualize this pipeline with Daml. Now, what other examples can we do this with? There's healthcare claims, there's processing credit applications, mortgage, you name it, any type of workflow that you want to do, you can actually put into a smart contract. You can manage that against a ledger, and you can have transactional dependence in a single source of truth. Okay, so some of the traditional approaches that we do to do this data siloing is we go ahead and we put on workflow engines, or we put out microservices, and we try to have an enterprise service bus, right? None of this really integrates the data silos or solves that reconciliation problem. All we are doing is we're messaging and copying data back and forth. In some cases, setting up a lot of processes that are around our virtual pipeline that only support the fact that we don't have the pipeline defined right. So there's a lot of reconciliation processes that go back and retrade or reestablish, renovate some of the trades in order to get them from system A to system B, and so that they can then reconcile with the two systems. All right, so what is the solution that we're proposing? Daml. We've talked about this kind of at a high level. Let me tell you a couple things that I think are pretty interesting about this. So we've introduced this concept of party and how a party works. A party ends up being responsible for a contract, can be a signer on the contract, which means he has an obligation, but we also give the party rights. So rights are essentially they can make a choice on the contract and act on that contract. So maybe the contract is an asset that they're going to transfer to somebody else, right? We can put some code in the contract, in the smart contract, that gives the ability for a party to actually affect that transfer. One thing that was touched on pretty heavily, right now we have Daml. We have done a bunch of integrations, and we are now able to deploy this on many different ledgers as well as databases underneath. We mentioned doing testing on Postgres. Right, we also have our own cloud-based services. If you want to do some testing there, it's called Daml, and we'll probably have another meetup that features that. And I think that's all I really want to mention on that. And so now, Levy, if you will come up here and actually show us how to code Daml, right? I'd be really interested in seeing that myself.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to take a very simple use case that hopefully sort of cuts across some of these silos, but still solves the problem of having different parties participating in kind of the same workflow. So the specific problem I wanted to sort of show in code is one of asking for budget from like a central treasury department. So the idea is that different departments within an organization, they all get some sort of budget allocation that they have to spend for the year. If you're from sort of capital markets, this looks like, this is the treasury function. This is the function of the treasury. They give out effectively a line of credit or a basically cash that they can exchange amongst them, the different departments within the bank, that they can redeem kind of as they send money out of the bank via wire or cash or SWIFT or something like that. So we'll mock that up. So how many have you seen? Oh yeah. So there's some new faces and there's some old faces from the last meetup. So how many of you have seen Daml before? Awesome. All right, so I'll go a little bit more quickly, but if you've never seen Daml before, if you've never coded in your life before, it's actually okay. You'll see that there's nothing, not a whole lot of curly braces and punctuation and semicolons within the language. So hopefully you'll be able to follow along. And you'll see that most of the terms are expressed in business language, okay? So I'm gonna share my screen here. Okay, so I'm going to start a new project from scratch called budgeting. Oops. So right now I'm using the Daml SDK basically. Whenever I type Daml over here, this is giving me access to some of the developers tool that we would use to write Daml. Okay, so I cd into that directory. And right away something, this will give me a skeleton project right out of the box that will show a very simple asset and some of the features of the SDK. So this is, if you've never seen Daml, this might be your first exposure to it. Most of the time when you're writing Daml, you're creating these things called templates. Templates describe the behavior and the data associated with smart contracts on a persistence layer, whether it be on a SQL database or whether it's on a distributed ledger. And in fact, this asset, which comes out of the box, is already sort of showing some of the concepts of Daml. So there is the idea of a signatory, which is a party which is responsible for honoring that contract. So I'm going to modify this right out of the box. The first thing I'll do, in fact, is I will rename everywhere where it says asset to coin. So I'm going to, this coin is effectively going to be a representation of budget from the treasury. Okay, so the issuer of the coin is going to be most of the time the treasury within the organization. The owner is the actual desk or the portfolio or the individual who has that budget. Don't need name. I do need the currency of the actual coin and the quantity. So Alex mentioned, oops. Alex mentioned that party is a first-class primitive within the language. And this is the level at which disclosure and rights and obligations happen. So this is what we mean when we say that Daml provides the right kind of metaphors for representing multi-party workflows on a distributed system. You're squinting. Question? No. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, good. All right, let me begin this. Better?
Yeah. So can I, you said there are no attributes in the part concept. Can I customize it if I want to capture, let's say,
you can. So Daml has a very rich templating, a very rich type system. So if I wanted to say something like, I can create my own type, which refers to the primitive type, but I can also give it things like, let's say, department head, which let's say is the name, or things like that. And now I can include this inside the inside my template here. So I can say something like, that's the treasury party now. And that way, anytime I refer back, I can use those extra attributes. So I'll revert this back to party so I don't have to type in the department head every time. But generally, the idea is that there's a couple of primitive types with Daml, but also you can create your own And this can get rather rich. Because as I said, question in the back? You can think of it as a token. And the kind of danger with that is that a token, all it is gives ownership to somebody. Ownership and issuance. It doesn't enforce any of the semantics that you need in a multi-party workflow, which is actually what we'll try to do. But you can think of it as a token which lives inside an enterprise. But it's more than that. It's much more than that because it gives you the semantics to transfer that token. Okay, and there's an option already associated with this coin, which kind of came out of the box, which is to be able to give that coin from one person to another, basically one owner to another. What this coin basically says is that the treasury issues it to an owner, to this quantity in this currency, which they may wire out up to this decimal limit. And you can see that there is a choice. Basically, the owners of the coin, once they have it, they can give it to somebody else. And this is what this choice at the bottom here means. So I'm going to wire into it the actual wire, the ability to wire this out outside the firm. Okay, so I'm going to make a cash wire. So the idea of this is that once you have the coin within your organization, you need to be able to send that out the doors of your corporation, right? You need to turn this into an actual cash wire, or somebody needs to write a check or send a SWIFT or something like that. So I'm going to represent that part, the actual wire, using another template. So the wire is going to have it's going to have a recipient. It's going to have the original details of the coin. And in this case, by the way, it's just the original details of the coin. So it's going to contain all of these attributes here. Because note that once I defined this coin template, it became a first-class attribute here. And in fact, that is all I need to do. Oh, I should put in the settlement instructions. So settlement instructions will include things like the SWIFT code or the guy's checking account and routing number and things like that. The signatory on this wire is going to be both the owner of the coin, because they're the ones that are going to be sending it out the door, as well as the issuer of the coin, who eventually needs to fill that order. So the point is, once this wire exists, the issuer is required to honor it. Okay, so now I will actually wire that.
Does the recipient have to sign?
You could make them a signatory. However, if they're a participant on the network, we can just use the give mechanic instead, right? Because if they're a party on the network, you can just
the new owner.
Exactly. We can just use this give option here. So, and that's a good question, because that sort of case bridges two types of use cases. One is within the bank, and the other one is a truly multi-entity network running on the same network. And as Alex said, you will still continue to protect the data silos and ensure the privacy of each of the individual participants. Okay, so I will wire that up. Let me just make this easier. So basically, the owner can send the wire directly just by specifying the settlement instructions and the recipient. So this chunk basically means archive the coin and create a new wire for it instead. And okay, so actually my entire Daml model is now complete in a very basic way. I can issue a coin as the treasury and I can wire it out. So I'll actually try a test case for that. To do that, I'll actually do that in the navigator. So I'm going to have 3 parties on my network here: Alice, Bob, and the treasury. So what I'm doing now, one, it's compiling my Daml into a DAR file. And when we say that Daml is portable, what we mean is that we could take this DAR file and deploy it on any ledger. Oh. So this is the bytecode that'll run anywhere, and it starts up a sandbox ledger, which is simulating with high fidelity our actual ledger model, except obviously it's running on my laptop here, and it builds automatically a UI for you. So I can go ahead and log in as the treasury, and effectively issue coins to the participants on the network. So I'll say that treasury is the issuer. The owner is going to be Alice, USD, and she gets $100 with a wire limit of, let's say, 20. I'll go ahead and submit this. Okay, so here's an instance of that contract on the ledger. If I now log in as Bob, not Alice, but Bob, there's no contracts that I'm privy to. Versus if I log in as Alice, then that's the coin that's been issued to me, and I'm granted all of the choices that I've elected here. So one, I can give this thing to Bob. So let's do that, and now we'll see that Alice no longer is a party on the contract that she gave to Bob. Okay, she can still see it because she's the one who actually initiated the giving.
But only for this. So if Bob transfers it forward.
Yeah, if Bob doesn't gives this thing away, in fact, let's wire it out. Alice won't be notified of that. So she'll see the contract or she'll see the details of the contract, because she's the one who created the thing. She's the one who initiated it, but she won't be notified any further of any more updates. And let's say he's going to wire it to Alice.
Back to the treasury so that Alice won't see it.
Sure, yeah. That's a good point. Actually, Alice will not see the archival of that contract. She'll only see the that's the one she gave away. So she won't see the details of the other contract. Okay, so this is a let's add some terms and conditions to this thing. So that was asked about. So I put in this wire limit here, and it's very easy to make sure that that none of the wires exceed that limit. So what I can do is I can just put an ensure statement in here to say that the coin quantity is always less than or equal to the coin's wire limit.
Larry, could you also add an observer? That's going to be useful for the next Can you add an observer to these templates? Any observer, third party?
Yeah, sure. So a typical way to send a wire is to send the instructions to your own settlement system. You know, you might already have a cache management system within your organization. So what you might do is we'll add to this the settlement system and just make him an observer. And I'll just put that on the coin as well. Basically, this is the system which is responsible for settlement. They won't be notified of the coins or anything like that, but the minute that the wire exists, they will be notified. So I'm going to add a couple more parties to this network here. You can imagine this is some sort of an integration or something like Actian. Is that 10 minutes I have? Or okay. So this could be an integration or a system or something like that, or a cache system. So I'll just go ahead and add that there. Now we'll add another party to this thing. So I'll go ahead and restart that.
Is the restart blowing away all the other data?
In this case, yeah, because this thing is just a very lightweight sandbox.
So what is the ledger here
In this case,
on your computer? Yeah.
it's literally in memory.
Okay.
However, you can hook up this sandbox and persist it to Postgres. So there's a way to do this start where you specify a Postgres instance somewhere.
So that's controlled by your configuration file.
Yeah.
So to add a party, you added something to the configuration file and you restarted the system.
In this case, because this is a sandbox, this isn't.
Yeah,
You know.
but in real life, the parties soon can be added on the fly.
Yeah, and that will depend on the persistence layer. All right, so we're back to where we were. So I'll issue the coin again. $100, numeric limit of, let's say, 20. And the system is going to be what I call integration. So that system won't see it until, what was this? I issued this to Alice. The system won't see it until the wire goes out the door. Now, in this case, it's not really going to work because we're over the limit. So we're over the wire limit here. Okay, so you can see how you can put in terms and conditions, how you can control the visibility. You might be able to send it outside the walls of your organization. But the treasury will see everything that it needs to see. The integration, the cache system will see all of the things that it needs to see, but nothing else. Alice, Bob, the different participants, the people who are asking for budget, none of them will be able to see anything else other than what they're entitled to. Most of the time with distributed ledgers, the project sort of runs backwards. You have to try to pick a DLT first before you actually demonstrate value. What we're saying here is that you demonstrate value first and then you make your technological choices afterwards. You demonstrate using the navigator and you can deploy very quickly. So I think, for instance, you can take a Daml application along with the front end all the way to UAT using just the tools that we have, and then you can decide on the infrastructure after that.
As an integration kit as well, if you want to plug Daml into your favorite ledger.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. So there's there's a Ledger API on top of this that lets you connect applications. That's what I forgot. Using REST or gRPC. So feeding things into the ledger and getting things out is done via REST or gRPC. The other end of that, which is connecting a Daml runtime to your favorite persistence layer, is the integration kit. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
You feel a little tanked up.
Yeah, I think time to get to the next step of the evening. It's exactly a great point actually to bring in Actian. And they've done something that is the logical next step of this process. So what we saw was multiple parties, which are applications. If Alice and Bob were applications in his example, each of these applications would typically in an enterprise have their own databases. They would transmit data either through APIs or through file transfers to the other application. They would receive data back through APIs again, or database or data file transfers. In a sense, creating two different data silos, which can always have to be reconciled with each other. Using Daml, you saw that both these applications can be part of the same workflow. And now they share a golden source of data in the form of all of the smart contracts that the Daml workflow is generating for them. Now, assuming you've generated a lot of tokens, you've done a lot of budgetary stuff, wire transfers, et cetera, all of those smart contracts are now in the ledger. There is a need for maybe an observer like a regulator, or maybe a separate analytics company, or the auditing division within the bank to say, hey guys, we need to do an analysis of all of the transactions that have happened so far to check for money laundering or fraud or any other things like that, compliance, etc. You would create that party as an observer on all of these templates. So the observer gets a copy of all of those contracts, a subset of the data, if you will. So you define the contracts in a way that the observer gets a subset of those contracts. However, all of that data is still in the form of smart contracts on the ledger. That's where Actian comes in. They've built up a solution which pulls all of these smart contracts as the observer, respecting the rights and obligations and privacy and authorization that Daml Ledger provides. So it pulls all the data, enriches it, and feeds it into a data warehouse and constantly syncs it with the ledger so that analytics can now happen. So this is a problem that not many have been thinking about. Everybody's been thinking about operationalizing a use case. But if a use case is running in production, how do you do analytics on it on a daily basis for operational analytics or predictive analytics or whatever you want to do? So that's the problem they're going to talk to us about.
Thanks, Manish. So I'm Pete Vadas, and Mike Gennison is my quintessential SE. And we've been working with digital assets now for like almost a year, and we share a lot of the same philosophies, right? I think in this case our mutual interests are really aligned, because a lot of the things that you've all talked about in terms of reducing complexity and mitigating all the coding that's necessary to stand up these systems, it's really an arduous task, right? So we wanted to like mitigate all this. And so the technology that we've developed, and it's been patented and been around for about 20 years now with leading companies, and done thousands of different permeations of integrations, right? So very complex integrations. We got a really good bunch of customers that love us because what we do is really nebulous. It's we're attaching complex sources with very dissimilar targets. And that's like a feat in itself. It requires a lot of nebulous coding. The premise there is that we've automated a lot of this stuff, and that's the good news. Just like Daml is pretty much an automated platform, if you want to call it that, or an efficient platform. So is our the technologies that we've implemented. The next slide. So what we did was, taking the permissioning into account, what we did was we're able to pull those contracts and put it into our integration engine here. It's called Data Connect. It's let's think about it as sort of an automated, pre-built, with already prefabricated connectors to dissimilar environments. So we're easily able to connect to Daml through to some very specific drivers that we built, and then maintain a lot of the permissioning that Manish talked about. And then once it's in this engine, it's pretty much our landing point. It could be a on-premise database. We have something we call an analytic accelerator engine, which is not a fancy name for a very fast database. Or we can land it in the cloud, and it behaves the same way. And then we can use all the prep tools, analytics tools, to abstract those analytics for the blockchain and the ledger. And that's really sort of the integration at a high level. The goal here was to really create as much efficiency and be able to stand up that integration like immediately. And that's what I think our goal was and what we try to accomplish. Mike, you want to say anything here?
Yes, sure. So Daml is great at contract management and relational databases for the business analysis. So we build this integration to take the information out of Daml and into a relational database so that we can run this analysis. And this allows us to connect every tool, every business, every BI tool on the market to analyze your contract data.
Yeah, this was a pretty simple integration. The types of integrations we work on in kind of projects are much more complex. Hundreds of sources, very complex ELT and ETL type of deployments and complex targets.
Does the integration maintain faithfulness to Daml's privacy model? Like,
yeah, it does. It does.
You're only seeing the analytics that you're entitled to see relative to the contracts that you're entitled to see on the.
Yeah, that's a function of the logic inside the data integration engine. You could set those transformations and make those permissioning available as it exits the integration tool.
And then they are also logging in and pulling in contracts as the party that is already authorized to do those contracts. Okay. So they are an observer on some of those templates. So they only have access to pull the contracts when they have access.
Yeah, the logic is really back here.
As an observer, like a regulatory body or.
Right. The other thing that's really important as these contracts are flowing through this, we obviously we could do a huge batch all at once, and be able to capture them. But as incremental changes are happening, they're happening almost in real time, and we're updating that. The database with the database is actually getting pulled from the analytic tools. Yeah, sure. Next slide.
So these contracts are more like application functions, or they're like ETL scripts that take the data?
I'm sorry, repeat that?
So these contracts, they are more like application function, like a workflow, or they're more like ETL scripts?
I would say more like ETL scripts, and then we do the transformation into a relational format because we want to land it on that database. That's where we enrich the data. That's where we made there's some secret sauce there in terms of getting it so that it's abstracted from the analytic tools, right? But taking a sort of a look under the hood, and I don't really like to put this slide up because it's really confusing, but just to give you an appreciation is that on this side, you have all these complex sources, right? This is not a Daml a representation, but a broader industry representation where you have a lot of complex sources here, streaming data, old legacy stuff. Can you imagine trying to pull all those sources into this sort of data flow and data connect platform, also deal with third-party, integration tools, and then all the various file types and land that into Vector, which is the database, or Spark, or a Hadoop platform. We have a version of Vector that runs in HDFS, and then be able to pull that logically out of these with all these various tools. This is an arduous, very, very complex task, not relevant to what we're talking about, but relevant in terms of how complex what's running under the hood on these integration tools.
Yeah. The only thing that is relevant here is that the data on the contracts in the ledger may need to be enriched with information that comes maybe from a CRM. Say you want to pull in external customer information, which is not on the ledger, but it's there lying in Salesforce.com, for example. So you pull that data, that enrichment of that information happens here, and then it's pushed to whichever data warehouse the enterprise wants to use. So for example, if they're using Oracle, Data Connect will pull the data from the Daml contracts, enrich it with the Salesforce.com master data information about the customer, and then push it into the vector. So that's where this layer, from an enrichment perspective, comes in, and that's where Actian adds a lot of value.
Yeah, the other point that we wanted to make is that it doesn't have to land in an on-premise environment. It can land in a cloud. We have our instance of Vector running in Azure, in AWS, and in cloud as well. Cloud is not yet finished, but it's getting there. But this is sort of like the ecosystem of what we do every day. And then there's this sort of more relevant integration, and that is that we have, and this is really important to know, is that we have connectors to all these pre-built connectors to all these sources, what I call them sources, and the ability for Daml to do the quick integrations, quick snap into this, and then back on the analytic tools. This is a very powerful sort of model in terms of going to market and getting up and running. Any questions on this?
Does this mean that you have an existing code app or set of code apps running on?
Yeah, Corda is just an open platform.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not,
Yeah.
My question is, then you hook the Daml into that, or is it an existing Daml
No.
backed by these?
No.
Yeah.
No.
So
No,
the reason all of these ledgers are accessible to them is because of Daml. So Daml runs on them, and they access the Daml ledger.
Yeah. But if you build something without Daml,
then they would have to build a direct connection.
I build that correct connection for you. Correct. Next slide. Oh, sorry.
I see like a ton of integrations with third-party analytics tools. Is Actian's product based dependent for embedding analytics in your own application?
Yeah, not really. We're agnostic to the analytic tools.
Right.
We're just the mechanism and the sort of integration tool to them. We're not building those analytic.
Yeah, but if you wanted to provide analytics, like if you wrote a distributed ledger application, and you wanted to provide analytics in your own user interface in your own front end, would you be using Actian's?
I mean, we grab metadata.
Extract those analytics and
Nobody's saying
represent them how you
tap
want.
into Vector to pull in information on your own.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's my question.
Yeah, that's easy.
If I don't want to use Tableau, and
Yeah,
I want
yeah.
analytics in my own application.
Yeah, you can grab the native analytics that are generated from the database. Absolutely.
Represent it differently than how
Oh yeah. You could do that.
however you
Yeah,
want.
yeah, you could do that. Actually, the Data Connect and the Data Flow product, which is the integration platform, produces all kinds of metadata and
Sometimes
analytics.
they have plugins that you can put in areas of your own app that will, use some of these tools. You don't need to
Sure.
write your own integration.
Yeah, but if you want your own integrated product that has analytics related, that's the DLP app and has analytics in it, you may not necessarily want to use Tableau.
You don't want to use templates. You want to create your own page.
You want to create your own product
That
experience.
means you are going to recreate the richness of Tableau by yourself.
No, you
That would be
create
great.
parts of it.
You
might need a simple view that you
Yeah,
want to pay
sure.
Tableau for license.
Yeah. You could do both. It gives you the reason we're selling to the enterprises, and the enterprises have these are established data prep tools. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. It's already there, right? So the other thing that I wanted that's very very interesting is that we build native specific drivers for these on this side. In other words, we spend time with their development team so that you can kind of see native features of those tools that take advantage of our data output. So it's like it's very specific to like Click or specific to Tableau and Power BI. I think those are the big ones. MicroStrategy, Click, as well. Looker too. Looker.
Non-branded.
Non-
Non-branded with Tableau. It wouldn't be the Tableau brand that you.
Correct.
Oh,
Yeah. Next slide. And these are sort of, I threw the slide in there really quick. It's just every industry or every type of connector out there. These are just like food groups of connectors. Each one of these has probably hundreds from different industries, not necessarily specific to the financial community, even though that's where I sell these days. but there's queuing, there's messaging, there's customer service, there's Fix, Swift, and Accord in here. I mean, these are old protocols for there's everything. Healthcare has its own like world of connectors that need to meet their standards, and then there's all kinds of other stuff here. There's literally, I think, there's hundreds of groups, there's thousands of connectors, thousands of drivers that we've written over the last 20 years that connect to just about everything. And if we don't have one, we'll make a driver. If we have one, we'll modify it, and we'll make it specific to your integration. The cool thing here is that you can snap this stuff together and you're up and running. Anybody wants to put together a POC between the Daml environment and our products, we give you the software, we give you the integration tools, we give you the support, and you guys are up and running pretty quick. Oh, this is just a propaganda slide. The engine that we use is really fast. We had this AMP Big Data Lab benchmark. Basically, we were 10 times faster than SQL Server. We did also get really good feedback from the Gartner group. We got it up in the right-hand corner for some innovative, highly, cluster-specific warehousing platforms that we did, and we're doing really good. What I can say is it's been great working with digital assets, and the folks here are really good. I invite you to take advantage of everything that we've kind of built. It's up. It's up for grabs, pretty much, right? And we give these POCs pretty much for free, and we'll stand up something. You want to try a very specialized integration you have in mind? I think we could do it, and I think it'll be in the best interest of both of our firms. Right? Any questions? Anybody out there? All right, good. Hope you enjoyed the pizza. Came a little late, but it was fine. Right, thanks a lot.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We've got pizza beer left, a little bit of Q&A. We'll still be here for a while. So hopefully it was helpful understanding how we could automate workflows within the enterprise. Thanks very much, guys.